Reluctant Entrepreneur Tarot. I'm Diana Diaz, Master Certified Coach, and this video takes you behind the scenes for Card 2 Intuition. So when we think about what we know and what we know without knowing, or the way that animals, be they domestic or otherwise, know and sense things and follow their instincts, we look at the intuition card. And the quote associated with this is Mary Oliver, listen, are you breathing just a little and calling it a life? And this is a really important question, especially for the reluctant entrepreneur, to create space for that knowing. Are you breathing just a little and calling it a life, or are you happy with where you are? So making space for that, making space for that listening, that knowing the things that are not necessarily rational is important in the intuition and the value of what we know. And oftentimes the intuition, which is associated more with the feminine, can be deprioritized or even scapegoated in comparison with the more kind of considered objective masculine as opposed to subjective feminine. But it's part of the fool's journey in tarot, or the entrepreneur's journey, in addition to seeing what is possible with the serial entrepreneur moving forward to that knowing. So card 2, Intuition, is associated with the High Priestess. You'll see the columns, you see the Divine Feminine here. Rachel Pollack talks about this wisdom cannot be expressed in rational terms. To try to do so would be to immediately limit, narrow, and falsify it. Most people at some time have felt they understood something in such a deep way that they could never manage to explain it. The High Priestess signifies inner wisdom at its deepest level. So it's so important that we're making space for that, especially on your entrepreneurial journey. You are potentially dealing with critics who are maybe trying to protect you. The risks of the entrepreneur life are very real. So looking at what you know, whether it comes to you in dreams or visions or metaphors, and making space for the information that you're getting from what I call the intuitive data set is very essential. So for those of you new to tarot, there are relationships between the cards. So the serial entrepreneur is associated with the magician, the more driven, masculine, action-oriented. The high priestess, which is associated with intuition, is the more kind of divine feminine, and these two can be paired. And I draw a parallel between the high priestess and the Hierophant, or in this case, intuition and money in this particular deck. But knowing that there's always those dualities in tarot, it's not bad or good. It's the celebration of light, dark, masculine, feminine, these different parts of the cycle. As we lean into the divine feminine, the high priestess is the more mysterious, the unknown. The empress, or in this case, innovation, is the more association with the mother. So if we think about kind of the warmer feminine energy versus some of the colder feminine energy with intuition, and then the empress is aligned with the emperor. So while you may not draw a parallel between serial entrepreneur and intuition and innovation and sales, just illustrating these relationships between the cards in the deck, while I tend to pull one card at a time and use that to support me in my business, if you're interested in leaning more into tarot, there are relationships between the cards. And another card that is aligned with the intuition card, or the high priestess, is the moon. And so you'll see both cards have the moon in them. Both cards have water in them. There's water in the background of the high priestess. There's water in the foreground of the moon, and water is associated with intuition. You see the columns. The wolf and the dog are the kind of our more wild, untamed versus tamed nature, and the idea that in darkness we can't see as clearly. There's the moon illuminates, but it's not necessarily full illumination. And the same kind of thing happens with the high priestess. She has a knowledge, she has a knowing. Some people even say that the book on her lap, the book or the scroll, is actually locked. But it's not necessarily a rational or linear knowing. And this card in this particular deck is aligned with scarcity. So scarcity is a business tactic, it's a fear, but it's not necessarily what it seems. And so leaning into intuition, listening to the dreams, listening to what we know on a deeper level, even despite that fear, is the card associated with the moon. So these cards all have their own video, but I just want to draw your attention to some of the pairings in tarot in case you're new to tarot. Some of these relationships show up in this deck, and other ones you would have to be using a more traditional deck. But it's one thing to think about, especially if you're pulling multiple cards, how those cards have relationship with each other or may speak to each other. So questions to consider with intuition. Whether personally or professionally, what is your intuition telling you? How and when do you follow or disregard your intuitive data set? What additional evidence do you need in order to trust yourself? And how would your business change if you integrated your intuition? And I really encourage you to take the time and space and the quiet, because what we see with the High Priestess and the Divine Feminine is they don't operate on a linear timeline or necessarily in that kind of timeline or structure that we may expect or want. So making space for these things, making space for that listening, that knowing, and how it can impact you personally and professionally is important. If you'd like to listen more, my mom, Teresa Lebeco, comes on and talks about intuition. And she kicks it off with a poem that has been very important to me in my entrepreneurial journey. It's Jan Richardson's Beloved is Where We Begin. If you would enter into the wilderness, do not leave without a blessing. Do not leave without hearing who you are, beloved, named by the one who has traveled this path before you. So there's a lot about path. There's a path through this card. There's a path through the previous cards. You know, entrepreneurship is a journey, the fool's journey. And then also the poem ends with the whisper in the ear. And my mom talks more about supporting me and my father on our entrepreneurial journey and just the importance of intuition and making that space of knowing. The song associated with this is Billie Eilish, You Should See Me in a Crown. And this is the darker feminine as opposed to the more kind of socially acceptable Empress. And so it actually starts with a sword draw. The song starts with bite my tongue, bide my time, wearing a warning sign, wait until the world is mine. So there's a power there. There's a deep waiting, resting power there. There can be a coldness at times. It's not necessarily always the case. It depends on your tarot definitions, but the High Priestess isn't really bothered if we understand or like her or not. You know, our intuition gives us information, whether or not it's information that we were hoping for or looking for. So, you know, it talks about water, talks about you should see me in a crown. Your silence is my favorite sound. There's a call to, you know, calling her pretty. I'm not your baby. If you think I'm pretty, you should see me in a crown. And then the song is about her takeover. Watch me make them bow one by one. So this may be a darker song than some people would associate with the High Priestess and intuition. But as we think about the moon and we think about the High Priestess, there is that mystery, that cold, that darkness, that knowing, that is a balance to the kind of lighter or more structured cards that we see with the Magician or the Emperor. So food for thought on that. Encourage you to check that out as you look at the different aspects of the Divine Feminine and that feminine power. If you'd like to learn more, read the descriptions, the questions, the podcast, this video, and options to work with us are on reluctantentrepreneurtarot.com. And you can also check us out on Instagram. Thank you.